into this one, I had definitely heard of Codename Kid Next Door, but I never actually watched the show growing up. I knew the basic premise, I knew what the characters looked like, and I knew it was one of Cartoon Network's big shows in the early 2000s, but somehow I just never sat down and watched it. So this movie, Operation Zero, is basically my first real exposure to the series. Right away, something interesting I learned while researching the show. It was created by Tom Warburton, who is actually the cousin of Patrick Warburton. Yes, the same Patrick Warburton who voices Kronk in The Emperor's New Groove. That's a pretty fun little animation trivia connection. The premise of the show immediately reminded me of something Dave Pilkey's Captain Underpants. The whole idea is that kids are the heroes and adults are the villains, and the world is seen through that exaggerated childhood perspective where grown-ups are these oppressive forces trying to ruin all the fun. The art style even kind of resembles something you'd see in a Dave Pilkey book. Very cartoony, very expressive, but intentionally a little messy in a way that feels like something a kid might draw. The show follows Sector V, a team of child operatives in the Kids Next Door organization, which is basically a massive secret spy network run entirely by kids. Their job is to defend kids everywhere from adult tyranny. Things like homework, vegetables, dentists, and early bedtimes are treated like the massive global threats. It's a very silly premise, but that's part of the charm. Watching this movie, I couldn't help but notice that number one, the leader of the group, feels very intentionally designed to be the show's version of James Bond. He's the British one, he's serious about the mission, he's extremely committed to the cause, and he's always acting like the stakes are life or death, even when the conflict is something ridiculous like a dessert shortage. It's a funny parody of spy movie tropes through a kid's lens. Now, I will say the one downside of watching this movie without having watched the show prior is that the movie throws a lot of characters and villains at you very quickly. There are all these different recurring antagonists from the series, the delightful children from down the lane, father, and a bunch of others. And if you're not already familiar with them, it can feel a little overwhelming. The movie clearly assumes you know who these people are and what their deal is. But even without that background knowledge, the movie is still pretty entertaining. One thing that really surprised me is just how funny the writing is. This is very clearly a show for kids, but there are also a ton of jokes that feel like they're aimed directly at the adults watching with their kids. Ironically, in a show where the entire premise is basically adults are evil, a lot of the humor is actually designed for adults to catch. There are quick throwaway lines and visual gags that would absolutely go over a kid's head. The tone also reminded me a little bit of Spy Kids, especially the first one. Not in terms of the plot exactly, but in the sense that it's this world where kids are secret agents using weird gadgets and over-the-top spy technology. The kids next door have all these ridiculous inventions made out of household objects, things like weaponized tree houses and gadgets built from junk. Now that creativity is a big part of the fun. For anyone unfamiliar with the movie, here's a quick spoiler-free plot summary. In Operation Zero, the kids next door discover that a mysterious villain known only as Numbuh Zero has returned, and his goal is essentially to wipe out the kids next door organization entirely. This threat is so serious that it forces the heroes to dig into the secret history of the organization to figure out who the mysterious figure actually is and why he has such a personal vendetta against them. Along the way, we get big action sequences, tons of spy movie parody moments, and a lot of appearances from characters built from the show. It very much feels like a big event story for longtime fans of the series. And I have to say, I actually did predict the twist about who Number Zero is pretty early on. The movie drops some hints that make it fairly obvious if you're paying attention, so the reveal itself didn't shock me too much. However, even though I guessed the twist, I still appreciate the emotional payoff of it, because the ending actually goes in a surprisingly heartfelt direction. What starts as a very goofy spy adventure ends up tying into themes about growing up, family, and the idea that the Kids Next Door organization has a deeper history than originally thought. It gives the story a bit more emotional weight than I expected from something that, on the surface, is basically a cartoon about kids fighting evil adults. Visually, the animation is exactly what you expect from early 2000s Cartoon Network. It's not super detailed or cinematic like a theatrical animated film, but it has a lot of personality. The character designs are very distinct, and the exaggerated expressions work very well for the show's comedic tone. Overall, even as someone who didn't grow up with the series, I can definitely see why Kids Next Door was so popular. The concept is simple but clever, the humor works on multiple levels, and the world building is surprisingly expansive for what is essentially a cartoon about kids rebelling against adults. That said, I do think this movie probably works even better if you're already a fan of the show. There are a lot of callbacks, villains, and references that longtime viewers would probably appreciate more than someone like me who came in fresh. But even without that nostalgia factor, I still had a good time with it. For me, it gets a 7.5 out of 10, 3.5 out of 5 stars, and a B. It's funny, creative, and surprisingly heartfelt, even if it's a little hard to fully appreciate without knowing the show beforehand. Honestly, after watching this, I'm kind of curious to go back and actually check out the series itself. Because if the movie is any indication, Kids Next Door is probably one of those Cartoon Network shows that had way more cleverness going on under the surface than I realized as a kid.